Welcome back to the Digital Accessibility Podcast. If you're looking to learn more about the field of accessibility, how to implement it within your role or your company, or to get advice on where to start or see how others have navigated complex issues that you may find along the way, then you're in the right place. I'm honoured to be able to share these insightful chats with thought leaders, advocates and practitioners of digital accessibility throughout this podcast, and I hope you'll find it a useful resource. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the chat. Today, I'm thrilled and honoured to be joined by Henny Swan, an internationally renowned accessibility expert and co-founder of TetraLogical. With years of experience working in some of the biggest names in tech and accessibility advocacy, Henny has been a driving force in creating inclusive digital experiences. She's co-author of the Inclusive Design Principles and was the lead author of the BBC Mobile Accessibility Guidelines. Henny's one of the founders of TetraLogical, a London-based accessibility consultancy that helps organisations design, build and maintain accessible digital products. We'll dive into Henny's inspiring journey in the accessibility space, the story behind TetraLogical, the challenges organisations face today, and how upcoming regulations like the European Accessibility Act will shape the future of the digital landscape. So welcome to the podcast, Henny.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you. But great. So I guess to get started, we always like to ask about our guests' personal journey into the accessibility space or world. So was there anything that initially inspired you to focus on this area, and how has your sort of perspective evolved over the years?
Good question. Well, I think I'm one of those oddballs. I kind of came at accessibility via a very circuitous route. I think, like many people my age, sort of in their 50s, my background wasn't in tech or design. The web wasn't really around when I was at university. So I did Asian politics and Chinese language, which led me to China. And I was there in the 90s when it was the dot-com boom, and kicked off working for a Chinese search engine in Shanghai. And when it got squeezed out of a very tough market, I tried and spectacularly failed to set up a dual language marketplace for Chinese sellers and overseas buyers. A little company called Alibaba filled up that space, so we quietly moved to one side. But essentially what I was doing was really looking at user flows and usability and kind of working out how that worked for dual language and things like that, trying to understand how people might want to interact with web pages. I don't even think I called it usability back then. I don't think I even knew what the word was. So came back to the UK, and then I saw a job advert for the Royal National Institute of Blind People, and it was for an accessibility specialist. And I sort of remember thinking, I kind of know what accessibility is, but I've never done it in my roles before because it didn't feature in any way, shape or form over in China. So I literally sat down that day and read everything I could find on the internet, which was RICAG 1.0 and some guidance on RNIB. I literally don't remember anything else being out there, and something just landed with me. It clicked. That was the missing piece, and that's where I kind of knew where I wanted to go within digital. So I applied that night, and actually I really haven't ever looked back. I just knew it's for me, and the idea that technology could include or exclude people depending on how that technology is built was something I just can't accept that.
Yeah.
I'm a fixer. I want to fix things, and and it just felt like I wanted to go and sort of fill the gaps that actually a lot of people weren't even aware of. So sort of that was my start. But in terms of how my perspective has changed, it's a really good question. I think, like most people in the beginning, back then, I thought accessibility was mostly about code and, a little bit about design. If we wrote the right code and we used the correct markup and we followed the standards and we followed the guidelines, then things would get better. And of course, that is partly true. But what I came to understand really quite rapidly is it's fundamentally about people. People come first before the technology. It's about kind of giving people their equity back via the systems we build, whether they let people in or shut people out. And I think what's changed most in my appreciation of accessibility is probably context. And a large part of that is really how teams work, the context that they work within, the constraints they have, the realities of product delivery and how we do this well when all the business has lots of other screeching priorities. And it comes down, that context piece for me comes down to empathy. So not just for the people that are using technology, but for the people who are building and designing and managing and delivering technology, and understanding their challenges and how we can help them, remove those challenges, really.
Yeah, incredible. And it's almost a Pandora's box. I think I use that analogy all the time. As soon as you sort of dip your toe in the accessibility field, it's quite odd. I had a really interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with a few friends in the space about how obviously algorithms online work and LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile is full. It's awash with what's going on in accessibility, and look at all of this great work that's happening. But part of that is because I'm interacting with that type of content.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in that space. So it gives me kind of probably a wrong perspective to think just how much. I mean, there is an awful lot being done, and it's incredible, and that's part and parcel to TetraLogical and what you're doing in the space. But am I being sort of wrongly informed by the algorithm to say, actually, yeah, everyone knows about accessibility? Because then I just think, oh, of course, I just need to talk about that, and then people will understand what I'm getting at. But there is still an awful lot. So I don't know whether I need a separate account or a like an AI model of me that's actually not ever searched anything about accessibility, so I get a true perspective. I think that's what I need.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It is the algorithms, but you know what? That's nothing new. Like, I remember being on Twitter in 2007 or whatever, and then I was like, oh my gosh, everyone on Twitter's talking about accessibility. It's arrived, and I was like, oh wait, no, it hasn't. I've just followed a bunch of people, and I think it's really important because I've just had to have a little talk to myself recently, because I've been living in my accessibility world where we have customers who come to us because they don't need the advocacy piece. They don't need to be brought in. They get it. And we have some really amazing customers. And I'm sort of working with an organization at the moment who haven't had that exposure. So it's really taking me back to those kind of early advocacy skills and really having to bring in that empathy and understanding the pain points and the fear. It's tough. Why are you asking us to do this? Do we have to do it now? It's not in our budget. It's not in our roadmap. And it's like, it's okay. We're going to take this really slowly and step by step. But there's, every single organization you talk to is different, and their context changes. And our context can be very, very, singing to the choir sometimes.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I should be moving on to the next question, but just on this point, one more thing about that as well. So it's amazing to be working with, some of the amazing brands and clients that you do have with through or as TetraLogical. However, there's always that step change almost as well. If there's a change in leadership, a change in the team or the design or development team, without that advocacy piece or the maturity model being met with the initial work that you're doing, that you could end up back at square one, couldn't you? I suppose your work is quickly undone at times.
It can be really quickly undone. It kind of depends on how long the history is of accessibility within that organization. So you see organizations where all the accessibility is down to the people who are prepared to take it on. And then when they leave, there's this terrible vacuum. Then you've got organizations who've gone through several iterations around accessibility. So perhaps they've been doing it for really last 20 years. And there are organizations who have. And so they kind of have changes in organizational changes, not necessarily team changes, and that can absolutely impact culture and morale, and with that it impacts every aspect of your work. But in accessibility we can see how things can very quickly fall apart. But something that I've noticed personally is, in terms of we kind of work on large consultancy pieces, and often we're working, our point of contact will be a lead who's probably sitting within the UX area, but we're starting to work increasingly when it comes to large organizations with change managers, because either they're looking to reimagine how they do accessibility, or they're looking to bring accessibility into the organization and facilitate that really fundamental cultural change, which has to happen before accessibility can truly be successful. And I just think that's really interesting. And honestly, in my role, change managers are my new best friends. They're great. They're amazing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I'm desperate to get to this next question, but it's just fascinating. You're bringing up so many points. I think that there's a part there as well with the whole digital transformation. There's so many companies that went through that, and how much of that transformation included accessibility or usability as a best practice when they were transforming their processes or their systems to be more digitally usable. So I don't know, maybe something may have been missed for certain organizations, at least, when doing that.
Yeah, it feels like it is, because when I'm aware of kind of accessibility being, accessibility transformation, it's not generally through a big digital transformation. That's a really interesting point, Joe, actually. No, definitely haven't been part of a big digital transformation with accessibility. So, got me thinking there.
But maybe that's the thing, and it's the natural sort of place for it to be with that change management, because it's beyond the tech. There's so much more to it.
It should be, but maybe it's just sometimes it is a bigger piece. I don't know, but yeah.
Brilliant. Right. Well, so finally to question 2. Sorry, I'm taking more of your time than I thought. You have had an incredible journey throughout your whole career. So you've worked with some of the most influential companies in accessibility, and not necessarily accessibility focused organizations, but you've worked with the RNIB, the BBC, Opera Software, the Paciello Group. So I was going to ask, I'm finally getting there to this question. What led to the founding of TetraLogical and your role as director there, and how does the mission and approach differ from your competitors, I suppose, or other consultancies out there?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I mean, I've been really fortunate with some of the organisations I've worked with, and I think each and every one has taught me a lesson which I've brought into TetraLogical. I've been really fortunate on my accessibility journey, and I think I've been fortunate both in terms of opportunities, but also the products I've worked on. I've been able to work on products I use and I love, thinking about, iPlayer and Netflix and things like that. But equally, working alongside people who, genuinely care about accessibility. And I am going to answer your question. I am going to get to the point. All of that, you learn a lot from people who inspire you. You learn a lot from people who don't inspire you as well. Equally, you learn a lot from kind of cultural shifts within your kind of area and things. So I would say that the 4 of us at TetraLogical who set it up, so Lonnie Watson, Ian Pouncey, Steve Faulkner, and I all had a very kind of firm shared belief that accessibility needed a fresh approach. This was sort of a while ago, and one that really puts people back in the centre. So we felt that accessibility was very much starting to become rooted in compliance strategy, which leaves people behind, and that's why our mission, up there in lights on our website, is we believe in a world where technology holds no one back, and the key word here is actually no one, because what we mean by that is, we want to remove barriers for disabled people using technology, of course, but, and I've alluded to this already, it's just as important to remove the barriers for people who are designing, building, managing and delivering accessible technology. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to sort of put people back at the centre and perhaps make sure that accessibility wasn't just a compliance strategy. So perhaps what makes us different is that we look at both sides of the equation, and we are thinking about people all the time. So we kind of put TetraLogical together based around 4 core principles. So unsurprisingly, being inclusive is one, so making sure we include everyone. Sustainable, which for us, sustainable accessibility is around making sure that every single piece of work and effort you do around accessibility is something that doesn't just fix the current state, but can actually be used to fix future things and stop other issues arising. And these aren't just words on a web page either, that, they are literally how we make design decisions. Design decisions for us are how we design services that meet the needs of our customers. And, they inform how we work with our customers, how we run the company, how we look after the team, and just how we kind of try and make decisions which make a more accessible digital world, really.
Amazing. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot more from the recruitment side of things. So the amazing clients that we're partnering with, a lot of the focus is starting to be on design systems, and reusable, accessible components. So that, I think, does that touch on a small area of what you do at TetraLogical in terms of design systems and things?
Yeah, absolutely. We do a lot of work on design systems. So, sort of consultancy, assessing, reviewing designs, documentation, all of that kind of thing. And I think you're absolutely right. People understand that a design system is one of those sort of verticals that can stretch across a number of different products that you might have within your organization. So it's a sensible and sustainable approach to look at your design system. And for anybody out there who has one and who's scratching their head as to how to start their accessibility journey, will look no further. Get your design system, look at it and see what you can do to make it more accessible. So yeah, it's a really fundamental, important part, I would say.
Amazing. Perfect. Great. So, well, I mean, that might actually touch on the next part. So from your perspective, what's the most pressing challenges that organizations face when they're trying to implement accessible solutions? And are there any sort of key misconceptions or barriers that tend to stand out?
Yeah. Oh, I think there's lots of challenges and barriers, aren't there? I'm immediately taken into the mindset of a team, and perhaps the management layer and the design and development sort of layer, and kind of, there's a number of challenges. There's resource, there's time, there's budget, there's skills, there's knowledge share, there's people leaving, there's having to train people up. So which one do you pick if you're going to pick one? But I think the main one that really underpins it all, I would say, is time. It really does take time to understand your accessibility risk. It takes time to prioritize how you mitigate that risk. It takes time to put fixes in place. It takes time to figure out how to stop it all happening again. And when time is scarce, accessibility can feel a little bit like a train. I get it. Something that you're quite reactive with, and it's always having to catch up, stay on top of bugs. But I think that's part of the misconception, really, that accessibility is hard, because you need a slightly different approach. It's really often because organizations follow quite a reactive loop, assessment, fix, assess again, fix again. And that's not a criticism. Sometimes that's simply the place where you have to start. But I've walked into customers that we started consultancy with, and they would say things like, "Oh, we've just had an assessment done by so and so, but we still haven't finished fixing the bugs from last year's assessment." And to me, it's like, well, that's the problem. You shouldn't maybe repeat annual assessments are not the thing that you should be doing, because all you're doing is chasing defects. It's, you're just mopping up the leak, not fixing the pipe. So I think there has to be a shift in thinking, and sometimes you have to be quite brave to do that when you've got like loads of things that you need to do. But at TetraLogical, we help organisations identify not just sort of what is broken, but why. And the goal is to fix things at source, so the why. And that might mean, as you said, making design systems accessible or writing better internal guidance, documentation, upskilling teams in a way that, you know, is sustainable and building a shared knowledge base, really. So it's just finding the ways to stop accessibility issues happening before they start. And I think the important thing as well is this work doesn't sit on top of your existing processes. It needs to integrate with them. That's how accessibility becomes sustainable, and it becomes not an extra job that you have to do, but it's just part of how things are done. And which is why sustainable is one of our core values, really.
And I think it can also come down to the certain methodologies, I suppose, when it comes to an agile workplace. I know that there's many great agile workplaces out there when it comes to the software development lifecycle and things, but I don't think anyone's truly agile. But part of that is that repeating or repetitive cycle. And then when you get things, previously it was cyber or security, that would be seen as a blocker, because you're actually just trying to complete that circle and go beyond that. Oh, but this is flagged up. So actually you've now got all of this time, or this that you don't actually have, this resource as well that you might need to find to plug that gap. And then does accessibility become one of those barriers, to use a phrase, to getting to release? But rightly so. But I guess if you don't even have that within your process and it's not being picked up, then you're just constantly releasing things that aren't working for everyone.
I mean, you've nailed it. Accessibility done wrong is a barrier. Accessibility done right is innovation. And actually what we find is going into organizations, because accessibility stretches across multiple teams, multiple roles, different products, we start unearthing some of the kind of the product life cycle hiccups that organizations might have that they probably didn't even know they had. And that becomes a barrier for us, because there's something within the organization that they might need to kind of fix before, you know, you can open up the taps for accessibility. But, you know, to pick up on your agile theme, I kind of think of it sometimes in a different way when we go into a large organization, and let's say you're starting at the beginning, or you might be reimagining accessibility. My kind of agile approach is start with a pilot project, see what works, see what doesn't work, document it, you know, and then start kind of cascading out the things you're really sure do work to other teams, and then slowly you start kind of like having that snowball effect of change. So it's sort of agile in a different way, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's constantly trying to innovate and use new ways of working, I suppose. And but to circle back to what you said about integrating it within the standard procedures or processes, it's a bit like with, again, to use the security as an example, DevOps became DevSecOps because it was integrated within. And I've said it before in previous episodes that it should be Dev accessibility ops, you know, it's part of the operations. But I guess I have been corrected previously on that as well, to say actually it shouldn't be within the developer operations, because it should have actually been done and thought about before that.
I you know, that security accessibility kind of alignment is often talked about, and I think there is definitely a lot in it, but I don't know if it's quite right to align them, because they're two different things. Security is not as human-centered in a funny kind of way as accessibility, and you're right, accessibility needs to happen before designs. You know, it needs to happen when you're kind of imagining what a new feature, what might be the most appropriate feature, before you even know what that feature is going to be, before you even know what that product's going to look like. You need to start thinking about accessibility, and yeah, I feel like I don't know enough about security, I'll be honest, but I feel like there's more of a focus on the human aspect with accessibility. So while there is an alignment there, I think we need to be careful that we don't overdo it, because one will get overshadowed by the other potentially, and one is far more technical than the other, I would say, as well.
Yeah, accessibility is more technical, right? Perfect. Well, so the next question. So in talks with experts and advocates in the field, I always hear TetraLogical as being like a standout. You know, someone actually said that the last episode, which was for GAD, was the Premier League of accessibility. But I think that I've heard that about TetraLogical before as well. So it's amazing to hear, you know, and it's clear that the dedication's there to providing a real solution for complex and technical accessibility barriers as well as others. So I just wondered if well, I mean, you kind of touched on it earlier anyway, to say that it needed a refresh. But was that always the intention, to become that leading force? And what's your view on TetraLogical's approach to accessibility beyond the initial or ongoing partnership with consultancies?
Yeah, I mean, that's very kind of you to say, and I'm blushing, but actually it's the team that make TetraLogical. They are, each and every one of them I learn from every day. I'm incredibly grateful, having been the only accessibility specialist in many an organisation, to sort of working alongside these fabulous people. They are amazing. Yeah, so what was our intention? So our intention has always been to make accessibility something that's practical and sustainable, and rooted in people's experiences. I don't think we set out to be a leading sort of force or Premier League in any way, but we did set out with the intention to help organisations do accessibility well. We didn't like the compliance strategy that lots of other accessibility companies seem to be some supporting one way or another. So yeah, doing accessibility well, and that's really what drives us. So when it comes to working with our customers, partnerships, I would say our intention is to not work with you forever. For us, a successful partnership is one where we gradually become less needed, less depended on, because accessibility becomes more comfortable, the team becomes more expert, it becomes embedded in ways that they work. And that's why we focus, like everything we do, you know, even from a sales call, right from the start, is about fixing things, you know, like focusing on the long-term solution. You know, every exchange we have with every email and report or meeting is an opportunity to knowledge share, mentor, answer questions, help put in the right processes. That is fundamentally what we're there to do. So, I mean, ultimately, yeah, the goal is accessibility has to outlive, you know, a project or a consultant bringing accessibility into the project. It has to be something that an organisation or a team owns, you know, part of its culture, and not just that compliance piece. So, you know, whether you're at the start of your journey with accessibility or partway through it, we're quite adept at kind of figuring out the landscape and working on original ways to try and kind of support you do that. Yeah. So yeah, we want to do ourselves out of business is the short answer.
I mean, well, that's the thing. I think there are a few people that I've spoken to, candidates that are applying for jobs, where they've said, you know, I kind of what you want to do is make yourself redundant. You know, you're no longer needed. But I just it opens the question of the definition of done, and then you're like, well, actually, accessibility is never done. So I get, yeah.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, we've worked with organisations where they haven't been doing very much, so we've been doing an awful lot, and we gradually hand things over. And actually, we do co-create services with our customers depending on what they need. And one of our services is recruitment support.
Yeah.
But what we don't. There will be a time when one of our recommendations might be, we think you should recruit somebody in, and we don't really think you should. You know, we're doing stuff which somebody could do in a role. So we'll help you, if you want to get somebody in. So there have been times when we've absolutely done that, and our definition of done might be, we started coming in and doing all the things, we're doing less of the things, the team is doing all the things that they can, and then we're just there on the sidelines for those particularly gnarly issues or consultancy pieces or the complex bits, or there for the bits that just simply don't fit into people's everyday work. So we very much think of ourselves as being an extension of your team there when you need it.
Love that. Yeah, and it goes beyond that then, doesn't it? I think that's I've heard it from a few places that offer services, and then it's nice to have the sideline support. So if anything were to creep up, but it's, you've gotten people to a better state, I suppose, or a slightly more mature sort of way of working, and then like you say, if something was to crop up, as it does every now and then, and then they've got you there in the wings. Brilliant. Perfect. So, right, here we go. The elephant in the room is the European Accessibility Act, which on my script or question here says is coming this June, but actually this episode is hopefully going to be released the day before the deadline, which is the 28th. So hard to believe it's just a month away now. But how do you envisage things going with the adoption and compliance with the regulations? And the question was about if there's going to be any negative impact about anything, something this monumental being rolled out. But I suppose it's like how, it's hard to say, isn't it? But do you think there's going to be a huge shift beyond this?
Well, I'm just going to crack out my crystal ball. Given me nothing. Well, no, it's hard to say. I mean, I loved your phrasing earlier, DEE Day, DEAA Day, D-Day. Worked beautifully. So we're on D-Day plus 1 month. Well, let's see. So one thing that we've noticed is there has been an uptick in organisations requesting an EAA assessment, ahead of the deadline, and very much the questions are, can you give us an assessment before June? Now, these questions have been coming in for the last kind of year, and they're still coming in. So I think there's definitely a mindset out there that, an assessment is the way to go. And your question about, is there a potential negative impact, is an interesting one, because I wouldn't say that any move towards making products and services more accessible is negative in itself. However, I do think there is a risk, and it's something that we've seen before with changes in legislation. There's always a little bit of a panic and a rush of feet. And my concern is always when accessibility is driven purely by kind of the motivation of compliance with the law, it can kind of become a little bit of a tick box exercise. And unfortunately, that can be when things fall apart, because accessibility isn't just a legal or technical issue, as we've said, it's a human one. So right now we're seeing a strong focus on assessments, and I get it, it's the right thing to do. You want to get your house in order, but while they're valuable, it is only one part of the puzzle, because if you want meaningful, lasting change, it comes from really changing your ways and how you do accessibility in the team, from strategy through to design and development. And equally, technology and law matter, but if people aren't the priority, you can end up with a product that is accessible but frustrating and unusable for people. So the one thing that we're finding quite interesting, there's a blog post that my colleague Lonnie Watson wrote on the EAA, and it's a really good practical breakdown of everything. And one thing that she's flagged is that the EAA actually has another component to it, the EN 17161, Design for All. We'll just call it Design for All for ease. So while the EAA sets out a set of technical requirements, Design for All is a framework for embedding accessibility into organizational strategy and practice. So you see where I'm going here. You've got two sides of one coin. Yep, you need to assess your risk through an assessment, start fixing things, start using that assessment as a way to fix why is this happening, not just where it's happening. But you need to also be looking at your processes. And I think design for all is something that we need to be talking about a little bit more, and it's certainly something that we're looking at more as well, because the EAA isn't just all about the 28th of June. It's here to stay. So we need to make sure that accessibility in your product is here to stay as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's the problem. I think I've seen another side of that when trying to work with new clients, and a lot of my role has become advocacy, just through the passion for the space as well, but also to ensure that people understand that it's important to hire people with these skills in accessibility. And unfortunately, a lot of the conversation is, well, we're going to make sure that we've got everything in order by that deadline because that's going to be retrospective. So we've got too many releases to do anything about it right now, but come back to us on the 28th of June and then we'll get someone in to help us in moving forward. Not the right mindset. I'm sure you've heard the same, but it's very frustrating. But I think that is a word that I've been hearing a lot lately, which is frustrating, because even when a company does finally get their ducks in a row almost and hire someone to come in and help them, or engages with a consultancy like TetraLogical, it's the initial frustration. Why wasn't this just done correctly in the first place? I think that's just something that you have to become accustomed to when you work in accessibility, is that it is frustrating. And then I think that Craig, who's now a colleague of yours and working at TetraLogical, mentioned about resilience, and you have to be resilient to work in this space. But I think in that sense, absolutely, you have to deal with that frustration and go, okay, we're back to square one if you've moved to a new company or a new client or customer.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's any point beating ourselves up to say, why haven't we done this before already? The question should be, we now know we need to do this. How can we do this in the most efficient and effective way that doesn't break our teams? And Craig's really right. It is about resilience. But it's about breaking things down and taking those initial first steps really to getting it done.
Just to circle back on one of the other points you made about the assessments that people are requesting and trying to get a feel of sort of where they are in their current sort of before they even start on a maturity model, but understanding the state of things as they are from an accessibility perspective. I think there's the other flip side, that audit or assessment doesn't necessarily do too much other than just tell you where you're going wrong. And I think that's a negative view on a lot of consultancies. If they're trying to give you audit upon audit, it's what else are you going to do to actually like go beyond that, and just rather than tell me what's going wrong.
So I've long held the belief that an assessment or an audit, whatever you choose to call it, is not just a list of accessibility defects. It's actually, if you scratch the surface, it's a map towards where a lot of these issues arise. So really just do a little bit of look at what's failing and what's passing, and depending on you and your context and your team and your organization, you'll start to see patterns. The patterns might be, do you know what, it's a lot of stuff that's wrong with our site is around content editorial. It's the link text is not great, the alt text is not great, the heading structure is not great. And then actually you go, hang on a minute, that's all done by our content editors using our CMS. Is there a problem with our CMS? Do we need to fix the CMS? Is there a problem with our training for our content editors? Is there guidance we need to give them? Equally, you might look at your assessment and go, hang on a minute, we can fix some of the really complex issues by fixing our components in our design system or in Storybook. So an assessment is so much more than a bug list. And there is a blog post in my head about this that's been swirling around for many a year that I need to write. So, and then you touched upon kind of repeat assessments. There is a time and a place and an appropriate time. And again, that comes down to context. If you're in that cycle of getting repeat assessments and you haven't caught up with the bugs from last year, then maybe you need to have a look at things and perhaps consider putting resource into different areas. However, it might be that you want a very light touch assessment simply to flag what passes and fails, so you can update your accessibility conformance report once a year. So there's assessments are, I think, really good. But perhaps what we're not all doing really well is taking the findings from them and applying them in the best way that we possibly could.
Yeah, no, perfect. And sorry to put you on the spot with that as well, but it's that makes perfect sense. So thank you. Brilliant. So do you have any advice that you could give to advocates or professionals that are working within smaller companies who don't actually have that dreaded word, the budget, or they're trying to bring in more expertise or consultancy, so they can't do that? But how can someone just sort of make an improvement without budget or sign off or buy-in?
Yeah, this is a question that's really close to my heart, because I'm very keenly aware that you can't get a consultancy in. Sometimes you don't really have a budget to do your website, right? So just and it's scary to think, Lordy, there's all this stuff and I've got to get my head around that as well. One of our principles is inclusion, and that does mean, trying to reach as many people who are on the side of delivering websites as possible. So my advice is you can do this. You don't need to have a consultancy, and start anywhere, start small. Just remember, you don't need to fix everything everywhere all at once. The most important thing is really taking that first step, and the first step can be really small, but those first steps can be very important. So it might be just starting to read up about accessibility, or having a conversation with somebody in your team, or even somebody outside your team, getting yourself a mentor. I really fundamentally fully recommend. There's lots of people who can do it. I do mentoring as well. And just starting to have those conversations, because I find that there's always somebody somewhere who's done this before, has a strong motivation to do it, and it's about teaming up and kind of building those relationships. So my advice for you is, if you are sort of looking to make that first step and don't know where to do it, we've put together a 6-day newsletter specifically with small organizations, sole traders in mind, called Accessibility Unlocked. And it, as the name suggests, it's over 6 days. And you get a nugget of learning in each day that just dips you in a little bit. So it focuses on a different theme each day. So who is accessibility for? How is it measured? How is it tested? What role does each person play? Each day we include kind of links to resources, videos, practical prompts, things to make you think, and also quotes from the team. I love my team, so I have to put quotes from the team. And then by the end of the series, you get a simple downloadable roadmap, which you can then kind of decant all your thoughts into. And that roadmap is that small step. And that roadmap can be really simple. It could be kind of, I'm going to sign up to this WebAIM newsletter and read that every day, every week. I'm going to go and read this book, through to, all right, I'm going to go and have a conversation with my boss and I'm going to put together a business case, or I'm going to see if I can find any free training resources for my team. It can be as small or as big as you like. And the other thing I think with those kind of little roadmaps is, don't overdo it. Just put in things which are achievable, and then you can update it and you can put other things in. So it's just making that first step, really. And honestly, it's far better to begin with something than wait for that perfect moment to do everything, which doesn't really generally happen.
Yeah, I was going to say spoiler alert there, because I'm actually on day 5 of the of the 6-day newsletter. I was like, oh, now I know what's coming. But
it is a spoiler alert. I shouldn't have said actually about the last bit at the end.
Well, I'll act surprised when it comes through tomorrow. There's a huge amount of discussion with people I've been speaking to recently has been about the education piece, and that is going to make everyone's lives in the future a lot better if we can implement inductions when people are joining companies, to have a section on accessibility, which Heather Hepburn's doing at Skyscanner, which is phenomenal. They're also doing a lot to support modules at universities within the sort of technical or STEM subjects, just to ensure that there is a module or some mention of disability awareness or digital accessibility, because even just having that small nugget, and then that's just going to grow exponentially, you would hope. It took one thing for me to go, oh my God, this is incredible, and this really needs to happen. And then you will get people like that. I mean, I'm a recruiter, so people would be like, oh, you don't care about anyone, you just want to bill. But actually, there are, regardless of the walk of life or what work you do, there is so much you can do, and there's so much free resource as well. So that's hugely valuable and generous of TetraLogical to put that together. I'm really enjoying it as well, and I definitely encourage everyone to seek that out, and I'll try and link to it on the episode as well. But it's there are some great resources out there, and I agree.
Resources, you got to pick the right ones, but there are some amazing resources. There's almost, you're spoiled for choice, but yeah, I think a lot of organizations and individuals are incredibly generous with their knowledge and their time and put it out there. So go consume it.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Perfect. Well, so that actually brings me to final thoughts. So it's over to you, Henny. If there's anything you want to share or plug, or if there's any upcoming events or initiatives, personal projects, anything that you'd like to discuss, then feel free.
Oh, thank you. I suppose my final thought is not overly original, breaking our principle here, but we as an organisation and myself, as an individual, have been thinking a lot about the intersection of AI and accessibility, and in particular ethics within it. How can we use it to enhance what we do without it being unethical? What are the risks of using AI? What are the risks of not using AI? We have customers who say, we need you to guarantee you're not using AI, and we fully respect that. So we are thinking quite heavily about that, because of course there's well documented and well discussed bias within AI against not just people with disabilities, but all areas of life. And that is a problem, and it's definitely a problem in terms of people relying on AI to give them answers to questions, and sort of the energy and usage of AI. So yeah, that's something that we've been looking into a lot as an organisation, and I think my kind of interest in it was great, actually bringing it back to education. So together with our friends at Open Inclusion, who do some phenomenal work around research into accessibility, etc. They're doing supporting Sussex University in Guildford on an AI for digital media inclusion course. It's a doctorate course. And I was fortunate enough to go along and do a guest lecture. And I can't tell you how happy I am to see a course like that out there. AI for digital media and inclusion. I mean, that's got all the words that I would like to see. So, I mean, the fact that even exists is a win, but I'm really excited to see what some of the graduates come out with that, and to see that it's recognised, as part of a doctorate, which is phenomenal. So, yeah, that would be my final thought.
Amazing. More of that, definitely. And I'm sure we will start to see more and more of it. And I hope that the EAA does actually provide a bit more of a appetite. We talk about the accessibility maturity model. I think that it's also just building on that appetite for it, and understanding that there's beyond the right thing to do. There is a business case there. There is, if you want to be that insensitive and just talk about the business case or the return on investment, then that exists too. So there's actually really no reason people shouldn't be focusing on it. So
yeah, it's a win-win all round.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Henny. All of that, all of your time. I've been really, really looking forward to this episode and this chat with you. So I'm really grateful for all of what you're doing and for your time today. So thank you very, very much. And I'm sure we'll talk again in the near future.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.